Chapter 271. Chi-Chi is still young. You can teach her slowly. Tang Yu directly treated her as a child. As he spoke, he touched her fluffy hair again. Old Master Lin was also an experienced person. He was also young once. He watched coldly from the sidelines. He could tell that Tang Yu was probably deeply in love, and it was not easy to change his mind. If it was Tang Ziyuan, that bastard, he would not agree to let Tang Yu marry the Shin family's girl. He would never allow Tang Yu to pick up someone else's used shoes without knowing what had happened between the Shin family's lass and the Qin family's boy. It was not that he despised Pei Chi-Chi's background, but this girl and Jinrong. It made people sigh. Putting aside these uncomfortable relationships, this girl could not escape the responsibility of Jinrong's current situation. If he agreed, how could he face Jinrong's parents? Would Lin Yun still be able to return to her parents' home in the future? These were all difficult to handle. Of course, as far as old Master Lin was concerned, he was someone who could distinguish between gratitude and grudges. Jinrong's car accident was ultimately Jinrong's mother-in-law's fault, but Pei Chi-Chi was an illegitimate child of the Pei family. The intricacies in between were all disadvantageous to this girl. Even if she married into the Pei family, it was really hard to say what would happen in the future. Old Master Lin came today because Lin Yun could not make the decision, so he could only come over to make the decision. He thought that Tang Yu would not listen to him, but he did not expect that Tang Yu's attitude was a little subtle. It was very subtle. He did not mention Pei Chi-Chi. If he did not mention this matter, was he preparing to quietly get engaged when the time came? At that time, everyone in B City would know that the Tang family and the Lin family were holding a wedding. If they did not go, they would lose their face. Although it would not look good on Tang Yu, in the end, it would still be the Tang and Lin families who would be slapped in the face. Tang Yu was certain of this, so he was not in a hurry. Very well, in the end, it was them who were in a hurry. Old Master Lin sneered. No matter what, I will not agree to this marriage. Tang Yu was still holding Pei Chi-Chi. He didn't say anything, but his fingers were placed on Pei Chi-Chi's lower abdomen, stroking it from time to time. Old Master Lin Jinan's eyelids twitched. He was not dim-sighted. Tang Yu's action meant, that stupid girl is pregnant with Tang Yu's child? Old Master Shin looked at him. Tang Yu, when did you develop this bad habit of preying on children? You're already an adult, aren't you? You're already an adult, yet you're still holding it in your hands. Tang Yu smiled, but he didn't let go of Pei Chi-Chi. He said lightly, Grandfather, Chi-Chi hasn't been feeling well recently. She always feels like throwing up, and her appetite isn't great either. She's usually very clingy. She'll feel better if I hold her. As he said this, Old Master Lin's eyebrows twitched. Yes, this should be a sign. Old Master Lin's feelings were complicated. In his heart, only the lowest of men would not take responsibility after playing with a woman's stomach. Now that Pei Chi-Chi was pregnant, how could he disagree? Old Master Lin looked a little embarrassed. Well, how long has it been? Grandfather, how long has Chi-Chi been feeling unwell? It's been about half a month. It's better to see a doctor another day to be at ease. Tang Yu said slowly, then lowered his head and kissed Pei Chi-Chi's forehead, as if he was treating a little pet. He didn't avoid Old Master Lin. Chapter 272. Old Master Lin felt that, for a pregnant woman to be in a good mood, she needed her husband's comfort. What if her belly was big? They had to get married immediately. Not to mention getting engaged, they had to get married immediately. Lin Jinan looked at Pei Chi-Chi's belly. The more he looked at it, the happier he was. This first child. His Tang Yu was so capable, so it was undoubtedly a boy. Old Master Lin had been looking forward to it for a long time. Previously, Jinrong's wife was pregnant. Although he did not like that flamboyant girl, he thought that Jinrong's mother would take care of the child in the future. With Jinrong's genes, the child would not be too bad. However, he did not expect that Pei Huan would have an abortion just after Jinrong's accident. That day, Old Master Lin sat alone in the study for the whole day. Later, he threw his most treasured paperweight. Bastard. Later, he was also the one who made the decision to annul the engagement between Jinrong and Pei Huan. This kind of woman could not be kept in the Lin family. As for Pei Chi-Chi, Old Master Lin did mind. This girl's face was too beautiful and attractive. Jianrong and Tang Yu were head over heels for her. But if she was pregnant, old Master Lin had no reason to object to this marriage anymore. He coughed lightly. Tang Yu, bring this girl to the hospital for a checkup. Don't let her get sick at such a young age. Tang Yu smiled slightly. It shouldn't be an illness. It's just that she is listless all day and has a bad appetite. Pei Chi was alarmed when she heard that. When did she not eat well and become listless? After Lin Jinan left, she looked at Tang Yu and said in a soft voice, Tang Yu, if you say that, even if grandfather agrees, it will be exposed in the future. He knocked her little head. You're not stupid. As he said that, he got up and walked to his desk. As he flipped through the files, he said to her very calmly, Pei Chi, are you doubting my ability? Then he looked up at Pei Chi. She walked over and stood beside him, pursing her lips. No, I don't want children yet. Although the Pei Corporation was on the right track, its foundation was still too weak. It was like a tree that had been eaten dry. His father was easy to talk to, but he turned a blind eye to whatever his subordinates did. That was why they were in such a situation today. How could she have a child with him now? Tang Yu sighed and reached out to touch her little head before saying slowly, I don't think I mentioned that you're pregnant just now, did I? Grandfather was the one who misunderstood. Who else could he blame? Pei Chi covered her mouth, her eyes filled with astonishment. This is Tang Yu. Sigh. Even Tang Yu can be like this. Rascal? Tang Yu smiled, knowing what she was thinking. He shifted his gaze to the files on the table, deliberately giving her the cold shoulder. Sure enough, his little fellow couldn't take it anymore. She lay on his shoulder and pounded him. He let her fool around for a while, then reached out to hold her and kissed her. Chi, don't feel burdened. I'm here. He ruffled her hair as if it were a fluffy pet. Pei Chi let him rub her hair for a while before running away. She picked up her bag and said, I'm leaving first. I have a meeting later. He said helplessly, You're busier than me. He raised his hand and gestured for her to come over. Pei Chi walked over slowly and stood in front of him. After a long time, she looked up at him and said softly, Tang Yu, although I feel very selfish and let Jianrong down, but... Chapter 273. Tang Yu didn't say anything. If he did, she would be in a bad mood again. He reached out to tidy her hair and said gently, Be careful on the road. Pei Chi nodded and walked out. Xiao Ran came in with a stack of documents. President, these have to be signed. She put them on the table. Tang Yu looked at them in a daze for a while. Then, he put his hand on the documents and looked up at Xiao Ran. Squeeze my work schedule. I want 4 days free next weekend. He and Chi were about to get engaged, so he had to do something. She had been in a bad mood recently, so he was going to take her out for a few days. Xiao Ran nodded. I will. As for the other things, I will ask President Zhao to handle them. Zhao Yi was Tang Yu's trustworthy person. She thought for a moment. Ask Assistant Meng to come along. Then, she lowered her head to look at the documents again. Xiao Ran saw that there was nothing else for him to do and walked out. When she was outside, she breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that the president was going to make a lifelong commitment. She didn't know if it was marriage or engagement. She was more inclined to get engaged. After all, Pei Chi was still young. Pei Chi and Tang Yu's marriage was finally settled. It was mainly because old Master Lin was eager to have a grandchild, and no one objected. Tang Yu hung up the phone and looked at Pei Chi. How is it? Do you think I'm smarter than others? Pei Chi was reading a book. Although she worked during the day, she still wanted to go to school to finish her design major after the company was on the right track. In the future, she would always want to do her own things. As for Pei Corporation, she would let the management team handle it when it was on the right track. Tang Yu leaned against the bar and drank a glass of red wine. He looked at Pei Chi sitting on the sofa and reading a book. His voice was hoarse. You're working so hard? Pei Chi bit her lip and looked up at him. What's wrong? Didn't you tell me to finish my studies? She lowered her head. I know. You're afraid that I won't be able to communicate with you in the future. Communication? Tang Yu smiled, his slender fingers playing with the crystal glass in his hand. Then he put it on the bar counter and walked over to her. Before Pei Chi could come back to her senses, He bent over and picked her up. His voice was low and hoarse. I want to talk to you now. Afraid that she would fall, she immediately hung onto his neck and hugged him. Tang Yu, I'm talking about your thoughts. It's so late. Pei Chi, you want to talk about ideas with me? He chuckled and kissed her. Pei Chi hugged him shamelessly and buried her face in his neck. Tang Yu, I want to read. He thought for a moment, reached out, picked up the book, and swept it into the study. Why the study room? Don't you want to read? Tang Yu sat on his spacious chair and hugged her. He also stuffed the book into her hands. All right, read it, he said very kindly. As he said that, his big hand had already slipped into her pajamas. Pei Chi bit her lip and snorted. How do you want me to read? Tang Yu's lips were close to her ear. His voice was a little seductive because of his passion. You read your books. I'll do mine. Pei Chi bit his arm angrily. Shameless. Scoundrel. Tang Yu smiled. He felt that it was good to tease her like this. She was finally a little happier after these few days. Later on, he didn't really do it. He just hugged her and read with her. Chapter 274. Zhao Ke returned home after playing mahjong. She didn't look too good. At first, Tang Xian was clinging to Tang Ziyuan in the living room, trying to get him to agree to go out. She missed Chi. Tang Ziyuan actually agreed, but he just wanted to tease his little daughter. He still had a compassionate heart and spent a lot of time with Tang Xian. Just then, Zhao Ke came back. Tang Xian looked at Zhao Ke's expression and lost all her thoughts. She said softly, Mom, I'm going upstairs to play the piano. Zhao Ke didn't say anything. Her expression was a little stiff. Tang Xian was confused. What was wrong with her mother today? She didn't even scold her for wearing her mother's least favorite jeans. Tang Xian leaned on the railing to peek. When Zhao Ke saw her, she immediately ran to her bedroom. Tang Ziyuan sipped his coffee and sighed. Tang Xian is your daughter, and she has that problem. Why are you so strict with her? Can't you just let her be happy? Zhao Ke murmured, Ziyuan, you also think that Tang Xian won't live long, don't you? Tang Ziyuan was a little unhappy with her words. Zhao Ke, do you know what you're saying? Tang Xian will be very sad if she hears this. If Tang Xian is sad, then I'm not? Zhao Ke had a crazed look on her face. Tang Ziyuan, what do you take me for? Are you thinking of getting back together with that bitch, Lin Yun? Am I right? Tang Ziyuan was furious. The person he owed the most in his life was Lin Yun. Now that Zhao Ke said that to her, he felt all his anger ignite in that instant. He had never hit Zhao Ke, but now, he raised his hand and slapped Zhao Ke's face. I'm the one who spoiled you. You've been living like a princess all these years, and you've forgotten your manners. Even if you want to join the upper class, look at yourself. Do you think you're fit to be Tang Xian's mother? Tang Ziyuan's words were harsh. Zhao Ke's face was marked with 5 fingers. She covered her face and stared at Tang Ziyuan. You hit me. She repeated it again, then threw herself in front of Tang Ziyuan and started to fight with all her might, just like an ordinary vixen. Tang Ziyuan, do you know how I've been living all these years? Look at you. You're just a hands-off boss. I have to take care of Tang Xian, a sick child who might not even live past the age of 20. Where were you when Tang Xian had a fever? You are in the bed of a young model, making love to her. Zhao Ke's tied-up hair was a little messy and scattered on her face. Her eyelashes, which were originally very exquisite, now looked like a lump of black paste. It looked a little scary. Tang Ziyuan narrowed his eyes and grabbed Zhao Ke's wrist. What about you, my dear Mrs. Tang? Haven't you had any close contacts all these years? Zhao Ke was stunned. Her hand was suspended in midair, and her expression was somewhat shocked. Tang Ziyuan knew? Giving face to others is also giving face to yourself. Tang Ziyuan let go of her, and Zhao Ke lost this strength, took a few steps back and fell on the sofa. She looked at Tang Ziyuan dejectedly. Her face was burning and her heart was beating very fast. Chapter 275. Tang Ziyuan looked at Zhao Ke's distorted face. Where was the beauty left in the face that could topple a city? There was a wave of disgust in his eyes. Zhao Ke raised her face. There were still traces of tears on her face as she stared at him. Her voice was a little absent-minded, but there was also a hint of mockery in it. Tang-gun, you don't have to say it so nicely. Do you think I don't know that in your heart? You can't forget that bitch Lin Yun. Seeing his expression change, she sneered, even if you beat me to death, I'll still call her a bitch. She lost you, but she stole your heart. Tang Ziyuan, do you know that you call her Yin Yun in your dreams? Zhao Ku looked up and chuckled. How does it feel to be hated by the woman you love? Tell me. Tang Ziyuan clenched his fists so tightly that the veins on his fingers were popping out. Zhao Ku was in so much pain, but she didn't make a sound, because Tang Ziyuan was in more pain than she was. Suddenly, he let go of her. Zhao Ku held onto the sofa's armrest and coughed violently. Her disheveled hair didn't look like Mrs. Tang at all. Tang Ziyuan sneered, Zhao Ku, if you know your place, I can still give you glory and wealth. But if you go too far, I won't let you off. As he spoke, he walked outside. Didn't he say he was in the bed of a model? Then he'd go look for her. Zhao Ku supported herself and was still panting. She stared at Tang Ziyuan's back and casually threw something over, which hit Tang Ziyuan's shoulder. It was a decoration. It was hard. Tang Ziyuan's body swayed. He turned around and looked at Zhao Ku calmly. You're unreasonable. Zhao Ku didn't know what to do. She stood up shakily and shouted at the top of her lungs. Tang Ziyuan, go look for your Yun Yun. Let's see if she'll still talk to you. She laughed maniacally. Let's see if your saintly ex-wife will still want a dirty man like you. Tang Ziyuan didn't turn around. He opened the car door and started the car. Zhao Ku watched as the car sped away. She stood there and stared blankly. His whole body seemed to have lost its strength. Then, he slipped and fell to the ground. She raised her head and tears rolled down her cheeks silently. After a while, her body began to tremble. She couldn't let Pei Chi marry into the Tang family. She couldn't let anyone find out that she and Tang Xian were sisters. If that happened, sooner or later, the truth would be exposed. Pei Chi was here to collect the debt. Why didn't she die? Why didn't she die? Zhao Ku slowly stood up. She reached out and combed her hair, raising her head. She was the most beautiful woman in B City, and many men were kneeling under her skirt. She couldn't let Tang Ziyuan know. She didn't want to live that kind of destitute life anymore. So what if she was her biological daughter? If he tried to stop her, he would still die. Zhao Ku found Rong Lei. After a round of passionate lovemaking, Zhao Ku laid on Rong Lei's chest. Her fingers caressed it gently. Her voice was a little coquettish. Rong Lei, can you do it for me again? What's so hard about it? Rong Lei took the medicine and was full of energy. Zhao Ku stopped him and glanced at him. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about getting rid of Pei Chi. Chapter 276. Zhao Ku stared into his eyes. You don't dare? Rong Lei smiled bitterly. He was no longer in the mood to do that. He sat up and leaned against the headboard. Looking at Zhao Ku, he took out a cigarette from the bedside table and lit it up. After a few puffs, he patted Zhao Ku's face. The situation is so tense now. Do you want me to go in like that old woman, Zhou? And he was not stupid. If Zhou Meilin went in, if something really happened to Pei Chi, it would definitely be traced back to him. The last time something happened to the young master of the Lin family, it was Zhou Meilin who took the blame for it on account of their past relationship. Rong Lei did not want to get involved anymore. Zhao Ku snatched the cigarette from his hand and glared at him. Have you forgotten how you used to kneel at my feet and say that you would always listen to me and do anything for me? Rong Lei sighed. I did say that, but you can't send me to my death. Zhao Ku, you know best what I do. Do you think you can trust my words? He looked at her sideways. Zhao Ku was so angry that her whole body was trembling. Rong Lei was just a dog she kept, but this dog was now biting back at its owner. She slapped Rong Lei's face, and Zhao Ku immediately lifted the blanket and got out of bed. Rong Lei touched his face and laughed. Why are you in such a hurry? But I'm curious why you want to get rid of her. Zhao Ku did not say anything and just put on her clothes. Rong Lei chuckled. Could it be that you're jealous that she's prettier than you? He also wanted to touch such a beautiful and tender girl. Zhao Ku turned around and sneered. I like it. I'm happy. Ronglei, you bastard. Don't look for me when you have no money in the future. Ronglei was the best at coaxing women. Although he was scolded, he still got off the bed and hugged Zhaoku from behind. He blew into her ear and said, "Baby, why would I look for you for money?" However, Zhaoku wasn't like Zhou Meilin. To Zhaoku, a pretty boy like Ronglei was just a toy and a tool. She sneered and pushed him away. "Don't give me that." After saying that, he packed everything up, not leaving a single coin for Ronglei. After the door was closed, Ronglei walked to the bedside naked, picked up a cigarette, and blew out a long smoke ring. He narrowed his eyes, and his smiling face became a little ruthless. Did Zhaoku think he was a vegetarian? He had worked so hard today, but it was all for nothing. Since she didn't play by the rules, she shouldn't blame him for giving her a hard time. Ronglei took out a few photos from his cell phone. They were photos of him and Zhaoku in bed. He thought that this would be worth a lot more than if he were to risk his life to do it. Ronglei leaned against the headboard and sent the photos to Zhaoku. Then he chuckled and puffed out the smoke. Just as he expected, Zhaoku returned to the room in less than 10 minutes. She held the cell phone in her hand and stood at the door, staring at him. "Ronglei, what are you trying to do?" Ronglei played with the lighter, and his lips curled into a devilish smile. "Nothing much. I just want to take a photo and reminisce about it." His eyes stared straight at her. Zhaoku raised her head slightly. Her hands were trembling as she gripped her purse tightly. "How much do you want?" Ronglei chuckled. "Maybe I don't want money." Chapter 277. Zhaoku had always relied on her good looks and a bit of stinky money to never take him seriously. In her eyes, Ronglei, was just a toy. Then today, he would let her see how a toy could make her fall so miserably. "Ronglei, you bastard!" Zhaoku scolded angrily. Ronglei finished a cigarette and threw his cell phone aside. "Don't play any tricks, and don't think that you'll get away with stealing my cell phone. I've made a lot of copies of the photos. If you don't mind the whole world knowing, you can play tricks with me." He looked at her with a pleased expression. "Zhaoku, it's a pity that you're not seen by all the men in the world." Zhaoku stared at him. "What on earth do you want?" "Take off your clothes, crawl on the ground, and bark like a dog." Ronglei looked at her. "Mrs. Tang, I believe that you did this a lot before you married Tang Ziyuan, right?" Zhaoku wanted to slap him. Ronglei sneered. "Zhaoku, do you really think that you're that 18-year-old girl? That every man wants to fuck you when they see you? Let me tell you, in my eyes, Ronglei, you're just a bitch and it's free." He swayed his body and held the cigarette in one hand. "Are you going to crawl or not? If not, I'm going to send the photos out." He patted her face. "I think you'll be installed with a hard drive. How many men will look at you and fantasize about it?" Ronglei laughed like a common man. He had completely fallen out with her. What was he afraid of? She still had a little trick in his hand. She couldn't escape from his palm. "If I crawl, will you give me back the photos?" Zhaoku stared at Ronglei. "Of course." Finally, Zhaoku put her fingers on her buttons and undid them one by one. When she lay on the ground, crawling and barking like a dog, Ronglei stepped on her back and kicked her. He squatted down and looked into her eyes. He grabbed her hair and said, "Zhaoku, I really want to find a mirror for you to look at. You look like a bitch with your eyes on." He laughed hysterically, and in the end, he even burned her arm with the cigarette, but Zhaoku shrank back. "This is the mark I gave you." Ronglei sneered and kicked her hard. "Get lost." Zhaoku knelt in front of him, holding the $1 million check. Her hair was a mess, and her expression was delicate and pitiful. "Ronglei, I beg you, for the sake of our past relationship, return the photos to me." Ronglei looked at her and chuckled. "Return it to you? Zhaoku, do you think you can get rid of me with this little bit of money?" She clenched her teeth and wrote a $10 million check. Ronglei knew that she wasn't well off financially and wouldn't steal public funds like Zhou Meilin, so he accepted it and deleted the photos in front of her. After deleting it, he kicked her again. "From now on, let's go our separate ways. If you dare to make trouble for me, I'll expose you for wanting to kill someone." Zhaoku bit her lip and didn't say a word. She put on her clothes piece by piece. She felt extremely humiliated. All these years, she had finally taken off her clothes and put them back on. But now, she was barking like a dog in front of Rong Lei. What was Rong Lei? He was just a toy. She wouldn't let him off. One day, she would make him a dog in front of her. She would definitely humiliate him. Chapter 278. Zhao Ke couldn't stand Rong Lei's words. No matter what, he couldn't say that she was old. Zhao Ke covered her face and went downstairs to the car. She turned over the mirror and looked at herself carefully. Her skin was smooth and delicate. She was in her early 40s, but she was still beautiful. But Rong Lei said she was old. No, she wasn't old. How could she be old? She was the most beautiful woman in B City. Many men fell for her. How could she be old? Zhao Ke kept reaching out to touch her own face, urgently wanting to get confirmation. But at night, even when she asked for sex, Tang Yuan ignored her. He turned around and slept with his back facing her. Then, she put her hand under his pajamas. Zhao Ke, I'm not in the mood. Tang Ziyuan sat up and went straight to the guest room to sleep. This was the first time they slept in separate rooms since they were married for more than 10 years. Zhao Ke sat in the dark, grabbing her hair and pursing her lips. It was all Pei Qiqi's fault. Her appearance stole her limelight. If Pei Qiqi didn't show up, she wouldn't have quarreled with Tang Ziyuan and wouldn't have to worry all day. How could she let her step into the Tang family's house? Zhao Ke kept her eyes open until the sun rose. Tang Ziyuan left early in the morning, leaving Tang Xian and Zhao Ke alone for breakfast. Tang Xian ate her meal like a lady, trying to please her mother. After a while, she whispered, Mom, Dad said he'll bring me to brother's engagement party tomorrow night. Although Zhao Ke was temperamental, she was still her mother. Although Tang Xian was young, she understood her mother's position in the Tang family. Tomorrow night, her father could go, and so could she. But her mother couldn't go, because brother's real mother would be there. Zhao Ke's fork landed on the plate, making a crisp and ear-piercing sound. The engagement banquet is tomorrow night. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at the courtyard outside. So fast, Tang Xian didn't dare to say anything. She waited, hoping for her mother's approval. But she didn't have much hope, because her mother didn't seem to like Qiqi. Moreover, her mother liked to fight with her brother's mother and might not be willing to let her go. But to Tang Xian's surprise, Zhao Ke actually agreed. She reached out and patted Tang Xian's long hair. Have fun. Take more pictures for me. Tang Xian stared at Zhao Ke in a daze for a long time. Mother, did she change her soul? Why was he so easy to talk to today? Tang Xian, what are you looking at? Zhao Ke snorted. Your brother loves you so much. Of course you have to go to his engagement party. Tang Xian smiled sweetly. Thank you, Mom. For the first time, she hugged Zhao Ke's neck and kissed her on the cheek. When Tang Xian's soft lips pressed against his, when her small body pressed against his, Zhao Ke really felt the existence of an angel. However, not even an angel could save her, let alone Tang Xian. She had thought of testing Pei Qiqi's bone marrow. Perhaps it could save Tang Xian. But how was she going to explain to Tang Ziyuan that she had a child before? Tang Ziyuan would suspect Tang Xian's identity. What would she do then? No, she couldn't. Yes, even an angel couldn't save her. Tang Xian, leave it to fate. Mom can't save you. Maybe an angel can save you and take care of you for Mom. Chapter 279. Zhao Ke went out after breakfast. Tang Xian looked at her anxiously, then waved her little hand. After the car drove away, Tang Xian ran back to her bedroom and called Pei Qiqi. Qiqi, my mom agreed to let me go with Dad. Tang Xian laid on the bed with a blissful look on her face. Pei Qiqi was trying on her gown for the next day. It was a dark brown muslin dress. It was elegant and long, and it was embroidered with 1,000 dense flowers from the neckline to the bottom of the dress. It gave off a mysterious vibe. With makeup, the effect was even better. Apart from being fresh and beautiful, she also looked more charming. It was Ning Jie who put on makeup for her. She coiled her hair into a retro hairstyle and added a dark golden silhouette. After Ningjia was done, she placed her hand on Pei Chi-Chi's shoulder and sighed. It's a pity that we gave up on the commercial. Pei Chi-Chi hung up the phone after her conversation with Tang Xin. Hearing Ningjia's words, she couldn't help but ask, who took on the commercial in the end? Ningjia smiled. A small-time celebrity. She acted with Wu Zhihao, and some indescribable things happened between them. Of course, after the commercial was shot, they separated. That's how the entertainment industry is. As Ningjia spoke, she remembered something. Mr. Tang objected because he didn't want you to be involved in these things. Don't overthink it. Pei Chi-Chi nodded. Ningjia looked at her carefully again and continued to polish the other gowns. Perfect, Ningjia praised. Tomorrow, Miss Pei will definitely amaze everyone. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she's the most beautiful woman in the world. Because of Pei Chi-Chi's young age and her beauty, Ningjia, who never liked to joke around, couldn't help but pinch Pei Chi-Chi's cheeks. Ningjia, this is too high a compliment. I can't accept it, Pei Chi-Chi laughed. She looked at herself in the mirror and caressed her face. She was indeed beautiful, but she also felt guilty. Her happiness, her being together with Tang Yu, was ultimately made possible by Jinrong's sacrifice. Also, her father was no longer around. If he was, he would definitely be happy. Definitely. Ningjia knew a lot had happened at home recently, so after a moment of silence, she patted her on the back. It's all in the past now. Pei Chi-Chi lifted her eyes and met Ningjia's gaze in the mirror. Her eyes were moist. After looking at it for a long time, her lips moved slightly and she said softly, "Yes, it's all over." Her phone rang again. Ningjia looked at the screen. "I'm going out for a while. Don't worry, there are people guarding outside today. Nothing will happen again." Thinking back to that incident, Sister Ning was still a little shocked. Pei Chi-Chi smiled and said nothing. The call was from an unknown number. After she picked it up, she was surprised to hear Zhao Ke's voice. "I want to see you." At that moment, Pei Chi-Chi's heart tightened. That person was her mother, but she was worse than a stranger, making things difficult for her again and again. Zhao Ke's voice was still cold. "Are you afraid? Are you afraid that I'll harm you?" Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and said, "Mrs. Tang, you're exaggerating." Zhao Ke gave her the address. It was the same cafe. After hanging up the phone, Pei Chi-Chi removed her makeup and changed back into her own clothes. Before she left, she informed the two bodyguards and took a taxi. When she arrived at the cafe, Zhao Ke was already sitting there. Chapter 280. Pei Chi-Chi stood there for a while, then slowly walked over and quietly put down her bag. "A cup of latte." "Thank you," she said to the waiter, then looked at Zhao Ke. Zhao Ke took a sip of coffee, looked up at Pei Chi-Chi, and said slowly, "The first time I brought you here was 2 or 3 months ago. At that time, you didn't understand these things. But now, you're so used to it." Her fingers suddenly grabbed Pei Chi-Chi, and her expression was a little tense. "See, this is the power of money. Money and power can make you reborn." Pei Chi-Chi smiled lightly. "Really? What about you? Have you gotten rid of the greed in your bones? The darkness on your body will never be able to see the light. No matter how much money you have, you can never wash away your greed." Zhao Ke leaned forward and stared at Pei Chi-Chi's little face. Her eyes fell on the pink diamond on her finger. This pink diamond, which was dozens of carats, was priceless. Her fingers grabbed Pei Chi-Chi's. Zhao Ke was very thin, so when she exerted force, her fingers were as scary as a chicken's claws. "Don't pretend to be virtuous in front of me. With this diamond in your hand, you can open 100 shops like this." "Pei Chi-Chi, money can't wash away the darkness in my heart, but it can change my fate," Zhao Ke said with a smile, but that smile was extremely sinister. "I don't have to look at those men's faces anymore. I don't have to sleep with this man tonight, and with another man tomorrow night. I don't have to be slapped in the ears and called a mistress anymore." Zhao Ke raised her head and said coldly, "Because I'm Mrs. Tang, Tang Ziyuan's wife. No one dares to look down on me anymore." "But you still look down on yourself." Pei Chi-Chi looked down. "Mrs. Tang, Dad is dead. I just want to ask you one thing today. In your heart, what is Dad? Don't you feel anything about his death? That was the man for whom she had given birth to a child. Zhao Ku sneered. I don't even like you. So why would I mention Pei Mingi? To tell you the truth, in my eyes, a man like Pei Mingi is just a dog. You don't even deserve to carry my shoes. If it wasn't for the fact that she had to get rid of the seed in her stomach, she would have endured the nausea and slept with Pei Mingi. She remembered that night when she turned off the lights. Even if she couldn't see, she could feel Pei Mingi's ecstasy as he touched her as if she was an antique. How disgusting. All men were the same. Pei Chi raised her head, forcing back the tears in her eyes. She took out a photo from her bag. It was perfectly preserved. He slowly placed it on the table and slowly moved it to Zhao Ku. Zhao Ku was stunned. Dad kept your photo in the safe for 20 years. Maybe he sneaked a peek at it every night. Pei Chi looked at Zhao Ku and felt sorry for her father. Sometimes, he stares at my face in a daze. I know he's thinking of you. Mrs. Tang, Dad helped you raise him and never bothered you. Don't you feel anything? If you don't feel anything, then why were you with him in the first place? Because of money. Zhao Ku sneered. Because I didn't have money at that time. I slept with Pei Mingi for one night, and he gave me 1,000,000 yuan. Chapter 281. Zhao Ku did not want to look at that picture, because that was her 20 years ago. She must have been young and beautiful. She did not want to compare herself. She was Mrs. Tang now. She did not want to look at the past. Pei Chi, even if I don't want you, you still grew up in a honeypot. You're still living in a villa, and I heard that Pei Mingi treats you like a treasure. As for me, do you know what it's like to live in the slums? Do you know how painful it is to have a stepfather who wants to take advantage of you at such a young age? Zhao Ku's face trembled as she recalled the past. Her cheeks, which had been injected with hyaluronic acid, looked unnatural. She stared into Pei Chi's eyes. I couldn't sleep all night because I didn't dare to sleep. I was afraid that I would be raped one day. Pei Chi, you don't know how it feels. Pei Chi did not speak. She did not know what to say. She just felt that Zhao Ku had gone crazy. Her hand was hurting from Zhao Ku's grip. It was so painful that it almost sank into her flesh. Later, I was raped by that bastard. He tortured me 3 or 4 times in one night. I lost a lot of blood. I was so scared. I didn't dare to tell my mother. I was afraid that I would be abandoned. I told her before. She scolded me for seducing her man. Zhao Ku said and laughed. Later, I got over it. I didn't care anymore. When that man wanted it, I gave it to him in exchange for some pocket money. At that time, I thought that my body was so valuable. Until one day, when my mother found out, she smashed me with something, causing my face to be covered in blood. She scolded me for being shameless, scolded me for being a bitch, but towards her man, the man who raped me, she did not say a single word of blame. She was only afraid that the man did not want her. Zhao Ku sneered. That's the real bitch. She lifted her eyes and looked at Pei Chi. Scared? There's more to it. I curled up in the corner of the bed and laughed at that bitch. I told him that as long as he beat my mother up now, he would divorce her. I did it with him. Zhao Ku had a proud smile on her face. Guess what? That man really beat my mom to death. Later on, we did it in front of her. Zhao Ku moved her face closer to Pei Chi. Then, she went crazy. Pei Chi's breathing was a little chaotic. She stared at Zhao Ku and asked, Where's that man? You really know me. No wonder you're my son. Zhao Ku took out a cigarette and lit it. Then, she said nonchalantly, Then he died. You killed him? Pei Chi's fingers were shaking. She wanted to move, but she couldn't. Zhao Ku smiled. There's no need for me to do anything. There are many men who would sell their lives for me as long as I sleep with them. Pei Chi pursed her lips. Aren't you tired of living like this? So I need to find someone to rely on. Zhao Ku chuckled. Don't mention your father to me again. How much money does Pei Mingi have in his pocket? It's not even enough for me to eat and drink for 2 years. Pei Chi looked at her. So you changed your target again. Are you going to destroy Tang Ziyuan's family? Zhao Ku sneered. It's a matter of mutual consent. I didn't use a knife to force him to sleep with me. However, I do have something to share with you. Zhao Ku took out a list from her bag and pushed it in front of Pei Chi-Chi. Chapter 282. After a long time, Pei Chi-Chi asked with a trembling voice, "Where's the child?" In front of her, there was a pregnancy test report, and the name on it was Lin Yun. At that time, Tang Yu was 10 years old, and Lin Yun was very happy to be pregnant again after 10 years. Zhao Ku looked at Pei Chi-Chi indifferently. She opened her eyes and narrowed them like a wild cat. She narrowed her eyes and said, "The child is gone. I was the one who got someone to push her and caused her to miscarry." Pei Chi-Chi felt that all the blood in her body was frozen. She almost couldn't believe what she had heard. Zhao Ku, in order to get the position, did not hesitate to let others have a miscarriage. "I have suffered too much, and I have suffered too much. I have lived in a small house, and the cold nights were too hard. I can't wait to marry Tang Ziyuan." Zhao Ku raised her head. "So, I won't allow anyone to stand in my way. So, you used other people's blood to warm yourself?" Pei Chi-Chi's voice seemed to be frozen. When she spoke, she didn't know what she was saying, only that her lips were moving. She couldn't hear anything around her. Her mind was filled with images of blood flowing out of her body. In that scene, there was the fierce Zhao Ku, Lin Yun, who was lying on the ground, and the unborn child. It was all blood, full of Zhao Ku's sins. "Now that you have heard my story, do you have any thoughts?" Zhao Ku recovered quickly, and at this time, she was already holding a cup of coffee and sipping it carefully. Pei Chi-Chi really wondered if she could taste blood. She looked at Zhao Ku's face. "All these years, haven't you had nightmares?" "Yes." Zhao Ku smiled and didn't care. "But it's not real. Pei Chi-Chi, the riches and honor in your hands are the real deal." She suddenly sighed. "The grudge between me, Lin Yun, and Tang Ziyuan can't be settled in this life. Lin Yun also knows that I killed her child, but she didn't say it. It's good that she didn't say it, so I can be my Mrs. Tang in peace." Pei Chi-Chi felt a chill run down her spine. Zhao Ku really translated the word ugly so thoroughly and vividly. "Aren't you afraid that I'll tell others?" She stared into Zhao Ku's eyes and said slowly. Zhao Ku smiled and picked up a cigarette to smoke. She tilted her head and looked at Pei Chi-Chi. "It's good that you spread the news. Let Tang Yu know that your mother killed his sister. I forgot to tell you, it should be a baby girl." Pei Chi-Chi could no longer sit still. She wanted to leave, but just as she stood up, Zhao Ku's voice rang out faintly. "Pei Chi-Chi, do you think you can still marry Tang Yu?" She raised her hand and chuckled. "Look, my hand is covered in blood. I can't wash it off no matter what. When you sleep with him, when you lie next to him, won't you have nightmares? You are my daughter, and you have the same blood flowing in your body. Think about it. If one day, Tang Yu or Lin Yu knew that you were my daughter, what would they think of you?" Zhao Ku closed her eyes, and there was a strange smile on her face. "Pei Chi-Chi, accept your fate. This is your fate. You and Tang Yu should never have started. If you really can't make up your mind, think about Lin Jinrong. He is Tang Yu and Lin Yun's closest relative. He became a vegetable because of you." Chapter 283. Zhao Ku was still sitting there drinking coffee as she watched Pei Chi-Chi walk out. She put away the list. It was real. Everything she had said to Pei Chi-Chi was true. She had killed Lin Yun's child and married Tang Ziyuan with someone else's child. However, what did this matter? No one knew. This was an eternal secret. However, Pei Chi-Chi could not marry into the Tang family. It was too dangerous. She would kill everyone, including herself. It was fine for Pei Chi-Chi to be played by Tang Yu, but she must not give birth to Tang Yu's child. Absolutely not. Pei Chi-Chi did not take the car. She walked back to Xia City in a daze. It was already noon when she walked back. She then remembered that she was supposed to work today, and Tang Yu would not be back for lunch. Little One called her a few times. She called back and said that she was not feeling well and needed to rest for a few days. "I know. Boss Pei is getting engaged tomorrow. Don't be too tired. Little One said cheerfully with a hint of warmth in her words. The phone slipped from Pei Chi-Chi's hand. Her face was pale, and she smiled faintly. Engagement? Could she still be engaged to Tang Yu? Her mother had done such a thing to Tang Yu's mother. Could she still stay by his side, marry him, and bear his child in the future? She knew that Zhao Ke's motive was not pure. However, she could not get past herself. She could not. Lin Yun's child and Jinrong. Pei Chi-Chi sat on the sofa and hugged her body. She felt very cold, however. Hugging and touching like this could not warm her at all. She sat like this until 4 in the afternoon. When her phone rang, it was Tang Yu's exclusive ringtone. Her body trembled, and she almost did not dare to look at it. After a long time, she picked up. Her voice was a little hoarse. Tang Yu. His voice was as elegant as ever. It's time to get off work. Where are you now? Do you need me to pick you up? I'm at home, she said quickly, and then added, come back soon and I'll cook for you. Tang Yu laughed. I hope I can see what I want to see. Mrs. Tang, get ready. Mr. Tang is looking forward to it. Mrs. Tang? She was surprised. Tang Yu smiled. A certain brat probably can't get used to this identity yet. How about this? We'll get used to this new identity tonight. Pei Chi-Chi's face was a little hot. After a long while, she pursed her lips and said, I'll wait for you. After hanging up, Tang Yu was in a good mood. Very soon, the things on hand were settled. Even when Xiao Ran came in, he could feel that the CEO was in a particularly good mood. President, starting tomorrow, all the work is scheduled for next week. Xiao Ran smiled. Have a good weekend. Tang Yu nodded faintly and then smiled. It's just a family get-together, so I'll treat you the next time I get married. Although Secretary Xiao had heard about it, he was still a little surprised. The CEO and Chi-Chi were really engaged. Congratulations, President. Xiao Ran smiled. Secretary, can you apply for an allowance and have afternoon tea? Of course. Tang Yu picked up a list from the table, wrote a set of numbers, and gave it to Xiao Ran. Do as you see fit. Also, prepare a list for the other departments. It was a celebration. Xiao Ran looked at the number and was a little shocked. Oh my God, 1 million. Tang Yu waited for Xiao Ran to leave before leaning against the back of the chair. His slender fingers reached out to caress his smooth chin as he smiled slightly. Chapter 284. Tang Yu bought a bouquet of white roses from a florist and put it on the passenger seat. When he returned to Xia City, he didn't knock on the door but opened it himself. As soon as he opened the door, he was hugged by a pair of smooth hands. Pei Chi-Chi's soft body leaned against him. He held the flowers in one hand and held her waist with the other. His voice was a little hoarse. Look what you prepared for me. He looked around. The dining table was filled with exquisite food. It was more sumptuous than usual. He smiled, took off his shoes, and walked inside with her in his arms. You seem to be trying to please me today? Then he looked at her. She was wearing a very ordinary set of home clothes. Well, I hope you like it. She took him to the dining table, took off his coat, and put it on the sofa. Tang Yu looked at the dishes. He knew that she had ordered outside in addition to her own cooking. And it was all his favorite food. He felt warm inside. Who said that his Chi-Chi was a child? She also has her thoughtfulness. Pei Chi-Chi lowered her head and took out a bottle of red wine for him to open. She poured 2 glasses. Is this a celebration? Tang Yu smiled and pinched her little face. She replied softly and clinked her glass against his. Let's celebrate. Tang Yu drank 2 glasses and his body felt a little hot because she climbed into his arms and reached out to take off her jacket. Inside, she wore a black spaghetti strap pajamas. The soft silk material clung to her delicate and curvy body. Her fair shoulders looked crystal clear. He almost didn't dare to look down. At this moment, her little hands were hanging around his neck. She pressed her face against his chest and began to unbutton his shirt one by one. Chi-Chi. He grabbed her fingers and glared at her with a warning look in his eyes. Pei Chi-Chi leaned into his arms. Tang Yu, don't you want to? How could he not want to? He thought about it so much that it hurt. He carried her to the bathroom, turned on the water, and pressed her against the wall. The wall behind her was very cold. but the body in front of her was very hot. Her long hair was scattered on her fair shoulders, and the spaghetti-strap pajamas clung tightly to her body like a second layer of skin, extremely seductive. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. Pei Chi shuddered. She hugged his neck with her little hands and called out his name in a whimper. Again and again he called out. As night fell, the steam in the bathroom gradually became dense, covering the whole room. After a few rounds of indulgence, he returned to the bed in the bedroom. Tang Yu was lying flat on his back, and Pei Chi was lying in his arms with only a thin blanket covering her. Tang Yu. She called his name softly, her hand moving up to caress his clean and handsome chin. Tang Yu, where are we going after the engagement? He moved his head slightly to the head of the bed and looked down at the little thing in his arms. He patted her with his big palm. His voice was unique and husky because of the sex just now. I'll take you to Yunqing to play, okay? He had already set aside some time. She must have arranged her work for the engagement. Pei Chi buried her face in his arms. Go to Yunqing to play? What's so fun there? Li do. Tang Yu touched her little fluffy head. I'll take you to ride a horse. Pei Chi muttered. I don't want to. I'm scared. Chapter 285. Tang Yu laughed. Then we'll just ride one. She didn't say anything else and just hugged him. Although Tang Yu felt that she was too clingy today, he liked it when she relied on him, so he let her be. He lay there until he was a little drowsy. He remembered that he hadn't had dinner yet and patted Pei Chi's face. Baby, get up and eat something. She moved her little hand and placed it on his shoulder. I don't want to eat, Tang Yu. I just want to hug you. He laughed. This little clingy vixen. In the end, he still had to carry her out to eat. Fortunately, there was food, and he just needed to heat it up. It was the first time that Pei Chi sat on his lap to eat, and she felt especially pampered. You're already so old, and you're still so clingy. What will you do when you become a mother in the future? Although he was reprimanding her, his voice was unbelievably gentle. Pei Chi bit her lip and looked at him with teary eyes. His heart instantly softened again, and he said helplessly, when we have a child, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of you too. What if the baby makes you angry? She stared at him and asked softly. Tang Yu laughed, and his slender finger landed on her little mouth. After a while, he suddenly said, It depends on which baby it is. Is there a difference? Pei Chi bit his finger and gently bit it. Tang Yu's finger paused, but he didn't move it away. After a while, he laughed. If it's a baby, I'll hit her little butt. What if it's me? Her eyes were glistening. Tang Yu's finger was a little naughty. After teasing her for a while, he said slowly, It's also hitting her little butt, just like how I hit you just now. Her slightly pale face was a little red. Tang Yu hugged her, and he seemed to be a little excited as he teased her. Actually, Pei Chi, I'm quite biased towards you. Pei Chi snorted softly. At least you're in pain and you're happy. Am I biased towards you? He pinched her soft cheeks. All right, baby, call me daddy. He did not mean to, and then he regretted it. Pei Mingi was new, and he would inevitably remind her of her sad memories. There were some tears in Pei Chi's eyes, but she was not angry. Instead, she hugged him. She buried her face in his chest and softly called out, Daddy. Tang Yu also felt bad. He hugged her tightly and said, All right, I won't talk about it anymore. Be good and don't cry. Pei Chi cried in his arms. But this time, it wasn't for Pei Mingi or her father. It was because of Tang Yu, she cried, and soon his chest was wet with her tears. He grabbed her hair and kissed her little mouth, drying the tears on her face. Baby, be good. Don't cry. I've already kissed you. Pei Chi raised her head and her face was very close to his. It was so close that she could smell the masculine scent on his body. It was so domineering that it stained her body. Slowly, she moved her little mouth forward and kissed his lips. Tang Yu asked hoarsely, Chi, are you sure? She nodded frantically in his arms, like a little beast begging him. That night, she had completely lost herself in it. Tang Yu kissed her little mouth, and then carried her towards the bedroom. She was thrown onto the soft bed, but she quickly got up. Chapter 286. GM Hotel. Although Tang Yu declined the media interviews, the reporters in City H all had sharp noses. They had long smelled the scent of meat. Early in the morning, they dressed casually and even booked a room in order to enter GM Hotel. The starting price of a room in GM Hotel was 8,888 yuan. It was a hefty price. When it was almost noon, the reporters hid their cameras, ready to take pictures of the engagement ceremony of Xingyuan's CEO. The hotel sent out hundreds of security guards to ensure that there would be no problems with today's engagement ceremony. In just one morning, more than 10 drones were shot down. At noon, there were only 5 tables in the small banquet hall. They were all close relatives of the Lin and Tang families. There was no one else except for Lin Jinrong's mother. Tang Yu was greeting the guests and meeting up with Lin Yun. Lin Yun smiled. When they were alone, she looked at Tang Yu. Your aunt hasn't recovered yet. Don't blame her. Tang Yu patted the back of his mother's hand. Of course not. He paused. I've contacted an expert in America. He'll be in City H in about a week. I hope it'll be beneficial to Jinrong. Lin Yun nodded. She couldn't help but sigh. Your aunt is a very good person. Even after such a big thing happened, she didn't make things difficult for Chi-Chi, nor did she speak ill of her. As she spoke, she hesitated. Actually, Lin Yun knew that Jinrong's mother also liked Pei Chi-Chi quite a lot. It was just that fate played tricks on people. If it wasn't for what Pei Huan did, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Perhaps Pei Chi-Chi would be her daughter-in-law instead of Lin Yun's. Lin Yun could only sigh. Life was unpredictable. After a moment, she looked at Tang Yu and said gently, I'll take care of things here. You go and see how Chi-Chi is doing. She's still young. You can't make any mistakes and be criticized. Although the two families were related, there were still some petty people. If something went wrong, it would be bad for others to talk about it. Lin Yun had always been proud and didn't want that to happen. Tang Yu nodded. In the suite on the top floor of the hotel, Pei Chi-Chi looked at herself in the mirror. She was very beautiful today. Tang Yu had specially prepared a dress, jewelry, and shoes for her. After she put it on, she looked at herself as if Cinderella had turned into a swan. He had given her too much. Everything was too surreal. She wanted to be engaged to him, to go to Yunqing with him, to Lidu, to every place he wanted to take her. Perhaps they would get pregnant unexpectedly. Tang Yu would definitely do it. He couldn't wait that long. He was so bad. He would definitely get her pregnant. After giving birth to the baby, they would get married and live together for the rest of their lives. Pei Chi-Chi looked at herself in the mirror and smiled. Pei Chi-Chi, I wish you happiness. She stubbornly wore the dress because it was her engagement day. Tang Yu, in my heart, I'm already married to you. Just last night, just now. She raised her head slightly, not letting the tears fall. In the past 2 days, she had thought about many things. She had found countless reasons for herself to stay by his side, but there was always a voice in her heart that said, Pei Chi-Chi, you can't be selfish anymore. Yes, she wouldn't be selfish anymore. Pei Chi-Chi slowly removed the pink diamond from her hand, took off the bracelet, and put them on the vanity table. Chapter 287. When Tang Yu walked into the lounge, his body stiffened and his gaze turned cold. Behind him was Tang Xian, his little tail. Tang Xian's jaw dropped. She stared at the gown on the sofa and the jewelry on the dressing table. They were all worn by Chi-Chi today. Did Chi-Chi run away from the wedding? Tang Xian did not dare to look at her brother's face. It must be dark. Tang Yu walked in slowly and said coldly, Tang Xian, close the door. Don't let anyone in. Tang Xian nodded, then looked up at her brother again. Tang Yu walked straight to the bathroom and then to the bedroom. He really hoped that Chi-Chi was just joking with him and that she would hide somewhere in her bathrobe. When she found him, she would smile sweetly and look at his anxious expression. But she was not there. He searched the entire suite, but she was not there. He took out his phone and dialed her number. Her phone was switched off. Great. Brother, there's a letter here. Tang Xian exclaimed. Tang Yu quickly walked over, reached out to take it, and opened it. It was written by Pei Chi-Chi. There were only a few words, but Tang Yu's face turned cold when he read it. He held the letter tightly and threw it away before walking out. Tang Xian hurriedly took the book and read through it. Tang Yu, I'm sorry, I can't get engaged to you anymore. I still have Jinrong in my heart. I like you, but I can't let go of Jinrong. He became like that because of me. I really can't and shouldn't get engaged to you. I'm sorry, Tang Yu. I ran away from the wedding. Tang Xian was stunned. Oh my god. The person Chi-Chi liked was Lin Jinrong. That cool Lin Jinrong? She gulped and chased after him. Tang Yu walked back to the banquet hall. Lin Yun saw him and went up to him. How's Chi-Chi's preparation? Tang Yu, why do you look so pale? Tang Yu's gaze finally landed on his mother's face. He said very slowly, Mom, today's engagement banquet will probably be cancelled. Chi-Chi isn't feeling well, so I'll take her to the hospital. You handle things here. Lin Yun was taken aback. Her instincts told her that something had happened. Mom, please. After Tang Yu finished speaking, he quickly walked out without any hesitation. He wanted to find that damned little thing and make her take back what she had said. He wanted her to take back those hurtful words. He could allow her to have Jinrong in her heart, but she must love him the most. Tang Yu drove directly to the sanatorium in Jinrong, but he was late. Lin Jinrong's mother saw him. Tang Yu, Pei Chi-Chi was here. She stood in front of Jinrong's bed for a while and left for about 10 minutes. Mother Lin looked at Tang Yu. He was dressed in formal attire and looked very elegant. She had watched this child grow up, and she loved him dearly. When had Tang Yu ever been so high-spirited? When had he ever been so dispirited? However, she was very familiar with this kind of dispiritedness. It was because Jinrong had been like this when he was engaged to Pei Huan. Mother Lin hesitated for a moment and pointed in a direction. She should have gone that way. I saw her get into a taxi. Tang Yu looked at her deeply before he rushed out and got into the car. He didn't start the car immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes and thought for a while. Then, he opened his eyes and made a call to Xiao Ran. Help me check if there are any records of Pei Chi-Chi staying in all the hotels. Chapter 288. Xiao Ran on the other side of the phone was shocked. Investigating Pei Chi-Chi? So she ran away from the marriage? Xiao Ran swallowed hard and couldn't say anything for a long time. She had always been calm, but she couldn't stay calm at this time. Tang Yu hung up the phone, held the steering wheel with his slender fingers, looked ahead and started the car. In less than 5 minutes, Xiao Ran called. He picked it up without any expression on his face. President, I checked all the hotel records, but there is no name of Miss Pei. Xiao Ran's voice was a little nervous. Tang Yu held the phone for a long time and said softly, I see. He hung up the phone and dialed Pei Chi-Chi's number again, but her phone was still turned off. For 3 days, Pei Chi-Chi seemed to have disappeared from the world. Tang Yu looked for her crazily, almost looking for everyone related to her, including Pei Huan, but there was still no news of her. He looked for all the train attendants and all the high-speed trains, but there was no record of her buying a ticket. 5 days later, Pei Chi-Chi appeared in the hospital. She stood in front of Lin Jinrong's bed and looked at him quietly. Jinrong, you are still the same. I can't wake you up no matter how I call you. Pei Chi-Chi's little face was much thinner, and her big eyes were a little sunken because of her thinness. The beige coat on her body seemed a little empty. Her fingers touched Lin Jinrong's hand gently. Jinrong, I want to lead you in Yunqing. I learned to ride a horse there. Alone? At first, I was very afraid, but later, I felt not afraid anymore. She closed her eyes. Jinrong, you know, when I have nothing and nothing to lose, I am not afraid anymore. Sorry, I used you. She said in a low voice. I told Tang Yu that I couldn't forget you. Lin Jinrong was still quiet, in the quietest audience. Pei Chi-Chi slowly squatted down and looked at his sleeping face. Jinrong, you have to get better. You're different from me. There's not so much darkness behind your back. You have to wake up. She wept, and the tears rolled down her cheeks and onto his fingers. His fingers were pale and powerless. Her hot tears stained his skin, Lin Jinrong's fingers trembled slightly. Pei Chi immediately looked up at his face. She stared at him, afraid to miss the slightest sign of life. But there was nothing. Other than just now. She didn't know if it was her imagination, but there was nothing. Pei Chi did not give up. She pressed the bell and called the nurse. Her breathing was unstable, and she was a little agitated. I felt him move just now. It's real. His fingers moved. The nurse looked at her in surprise. She checked again, but the result was disappointing. Miss Pei, you must be hallucinating because you want the patient to wake up. The nurse smiled apologetically. She looked at the little girl in front of her. She came here often, but now she was crying like a kitten. It was heartbreaking. Pei Chi lowered her face in disappointment. She looked at Lin Jinrong for a long time before she said softly, probably. After the nurse left, she covered Jinrong with the quilt and stood a step away. I may not be able to visit you often in the future, because she couldn't face Tang Yu. Just by looking at him, she would be reminded of how much he doted on her and what Zhao Ku had done to his mother. Chapter 289. After Pei Chi said that, she felt as though her throat was blocked, and it was extremely uncomfortable. She owed Pei Mingyi, Jinrong, and Tang Yu, and she would never be able to pay them back in this lifetime. However, she would try her best to pay them back, as much as she could. She left and closed the door gently. However, when she turned around, she saw Tang Yu. He stood straight and looked at her with a little coldness in his eyes. Pei Chi noticed that he was still wearing the same suit from the other day. He hadn't shaved his beard, and his eyes were bloodshot. He looked completely different from his usual elegant self. At that moment, her heart was in extreme pain. This was Tang Yu, the distinguished Tang Yu, the elegant Tang Yu who was still elegant even after a meeting that lasted more than 10 hours. She looked at him. They were just a step apart, but it seemed as though there were thousands of mountains between them. Their gazes lingered for a long time. Her lips moved, but she couldn't say a word. After seeing his current appearance, those cruel words disintegrated one by one. I've been looking for you for 5 days. Tang Yu stared into her eyes and slowly said a few words. Her body trembled, and her voice was dry. I've written it very clearly in the letter. Really? He suddenly grabbed her wrist and pulled her to his side. Her body bumped into his, and she wanted to escape, but he held her waist firmly and it hurt. Pei Chi, do you feel a sense of accomplishment seeing me like this? His thin lips said coldly, and then he dragged her to the elevator. Pei Chi struggled with all her might, but he seemed to be cold-blooded. Even if she was in pain, he still grabbed her and threw her into the elevator. He was so angry that he didn't hold back, and Pei Chi's head hit the wall of the elevator. She only recovered after a long time, and her body slowly turned around and leaned against the wall of the elevator. She looked at him, and a bitter smile slowly appeared at the corner of her lips. Tang Yu, I still owe you, but I cannot marry you. He did not speak because he did not want to talk to her now. He was afraid that if he spoke, he would accidentally strangle her. Pei Chi was thrown into the car like a rag, and when they got home, she was thrown onto the sofa. She sat up and looked up at him. Tang Yu reached out to pull off his tie and squinted at her. Because of Jinrong? Do you love him? Pei Chi's lips trembled as she moved back. He bent over and pinched her little chin. Pei Chi, what about me? What am I? He asked in a forceful voice. Tang Yu. She called his name in pain. His eyes were bloodshot, and he tightened his grip. She was in so much pain that she almost cried. What am I? He stared into her eyes, his voice revealing a hint of suppression. She closed her eyes and did not want to say anything. Tang Yu narrowed his eyes and suddenly let go of her. He unbuttoned his shirt and looked at her. His voice was cold. I'll let you say it. Pei Chi moved her body and looked at him in horror. The memory of that night surfaced like a demon. Don't worry, I won't use force on you. His face was expressionless. Then he bent over and tore her coat apart. She screamed, Tang Yu, you can't do this to me. You can't. She knew what he wanted to do. No, she didn't want to do that, because she would break down and be reluctant. Pei Chi struggled hopelessly in his hands. Tang Yu, I love Jinrong. I love him. I've never forgotten him. I'm sorry, I've never loved you. His movements stopped abruptly. Chapter 290. Pei Chi-Chi's face was covered in tears as she muttered, Right? I don't love you. The one I love has always been Jinro. Tang Yu looked at her just like that, his eyes filled with heartache. Suddenly, her face was slapped by him. Everything around her seemed to have stopped, and she couldn't hear anything. Her face was burning, and she lost all feeling. After a long while, Pei Chi slowly moved her face over and slowly raised her eyes. Pei Chi, say that again. The first time he made a move on her, he slapped her in the face, but it tore his heart apart. The little thing that he doted on, the little thing that he was willing to give everything to, they were going to get engaged. He thought that she was slowly falling in love with him. Even if Jinrong still existed in her heart, it was because of guilt. But what did she say to him now? She said that she had always loved Jinrong. Then what about him, Tang Yu? Then what about their sweetness? If she didn't love him, why did she say those words to him? Did she know that when you think you've obtained something, you're ecstatic, but when you lose it, it's like you've lost the whole world? Pei Chi-Chi's fingers lightly touched her face. It hurt, and her skin almost broke. He had used all of his strength. She slowly looked up at him and said in a numb voice, You bought me. His fingers pressed against her shoulder. She frowned in pain and didn't dare to make a sound. Pei Chi, do you also know pain? He stared into her eyes, so angry that he wanted to kill her. I only bought you? You only obeyed me, right? Her delicate body was like a reed in the wind when he held it like this. You never had any love for me, did you? He asked her through gritted teeth. Pei Chi-Chi's face was covered in tears, and her vision was a blur. She told herself that if she told him now that she was Zhao Ke's daughter, perhaps Tang Yu would forgive her and still be with her, or even marry her. But if that happened, who would she be able to face? Tang Yu? Or Lin Yun? How was she going to live in the future? She would rather. Tang Yu had never loved her. She would rather that he treated her a little worse. Lifting her chin slightly, she looked into his eyes and smiled. Yes, it's just obedience. Otherwise? What else do you think there is? Tang Yu, let's not deceive ourselves anymore, okay? He held her with one hand and caressed her red lips with the other. His movements were so slow that she was shocked. You say, deceiving yourself? I bought them, didn't I? He chuckled, but there wasn't a hint of a smile in his eyes. His fingers were still caressing her red lips. If it's bought, then it should be bought. He had once given his heart to her, but when she held it in her hands, it was shattered. Narrowing his eyes, he looked at her tearful little face. His slender fingers gently scratched her little face twice, but the words that came out of his mouth were unusually cruel. Now, take off your clothes, please me. Pei Chi was stunned. Don't tell me you still expect me to hold you in my hands and serve you? He patted her little face and let go of her. His body slowly fell to the sofa behind him and sat down. Pei Chi was abnormally humiliated, but she had brought this humiliation upon herself. Let me go. She knelt in front of him humbly. Her hair was disheveled, and her clothes were tattered. Chapter 291. His voice was hoarse. Jinrong is like this now, yet you still love him. Pei Chi, your love is so great. Listening to Tang Yu's cold words, Pei Chi half knelt there, unable to say a word. Her pain was no less than his. Tang Yu, you don't know how much I tried to leave you. You don't know how much I wanted to be in your arms for the rest of my life. What pain in this world could be more painful than leaving you? Her fingers trembled as she tried to undo the buttons on her shirt. She unbuttoned them one by one. Apparently, he couldn't wait any longer and suddenly grabbed her hand. She looked up at him, and their eyes met. Tang Yu's Adam's apple kept moving, and he closed his eyes. Pei Chi, I'll ask you for the last time. Just obey me? He didn't allow himself to beg her anymore. He just asked her this way. Pei Chi-Chi's hand was held by him. As she listened to his words, she felt as though it was a lifetime ago. After a long while, she gently broke away from his hand. Under his gaze, she unbuttoned all the buttons on her shirt and knelt down to unbutton them for him. She looked very humble, but he hated it. She leaned into his arms, kissed his neck, and used the way he liked to please him, Everything was like a woman who was bought. Tang Yu suddenly pushed her away and walked straight to the bathroom. Pei Chi-Chi fell on the soft carpet and bit her lips. Before he closed the bathroom door, he said coldly, "Next time, before you do it, wash yourself clean. Don't let me smell another man's scent on you, because it's dirty." When she heard his cruel words, her limbs felt weak and she couldn't stand up. About 10 minutes later, Tang Yu came out. He was dressed neatly and had returned to his usual appearance. When he walked to her side, he paused for a moment and said in a cold and indifferent voice, "Before I think of how to deal with you, I'll stay here. What about you?" She looked up at him. Tang Yu's gaze was even colder. "You still care about me?" He sneered. "This isn't something a bought woman should ask." After saying that, he left without any reluctance, leaving her alone in the cold house. He said he wouldn't let her go, but she didn't dare to. Pei Chi-Chi's lips pulled a desolate smile. One day, he would tire of it. She slowly got up and went to the bathroom to clean herself. She heard him say, "Pei Chi-Chi, your body, your entire being has the smell of someone else." She closed her eyes and let her tears fall, mixing with the hot water and washing them away. "Pei Chi-Chi, let him hate you. Only by hating you will he forget you. Tang Yu deserves the most perfect life, not to be destroyed by you." However, her heart ached to give him up. Previously, she had convinced herself for so long that she could selfishly have him. She did not want to give up. She did not want to leave. She wanted him, Tang Yu. Pei Chi-Chi slowly squatted down and hugged herself with her arms. She squatted there, sobbing like an injured animal. It was only in this small world that she dared to cry so freely, dared to call his name like this. She dared to tell herself that she loved him. She loved Tang Yu. She loved him very, very much. She loved him so much that she couldn't bear to part with him. Because of her, she regretted it. Pei Chi-Chi showered for an hour before she went out. Her skin was almost broken. She wore a bathrobe, and her long hair was wet and draped over her shoulders. Looking at the mirror, she murmured, "Is this clean?" However, no one could answer her. Chapter 292. Tang Yu had left. There was only her and her broken heart here. Pei Chi-Chi sat on the sofa. She didn't eat or sleep. She just sat there. Occasionally, there would be some movement at the door. She would look out like an injured animal. She was a little dazed. She felt that the person outside was Tang Yu. She felt that he would suddenly open the door and look at her. "Pei Chi-Chi, are you joking with me? Look, you're so stupid. How can you lie to me?" He raised his eyebrows. "Now, let's get engaged." She lifted her body in the dark. She stretched her arms out, wanting to hug his neck. However, all she hugged was cold air. "Tang Yu." She murmured his name. Her arms refused to let go. She didn't want to give up. She felt that he was still there. Early in the morning, a ray of sunlight shone on the sofa. Pei Chi-Chi was only wearing a bathrobe. The glaring sunlight shone on her face and she moved uncomfortably. There was the sound of a key turning at the door. Pei Chi-Chi blinked and immediately sat up. She was a little dizzy, but her eyes were wide open as she looked at the door. It wasn't Tang Yu who came in. It was Xiao Ran. There were two maids behind him. Xiao Ran looked at Pei Chi-Chi. He smiled and nodded. "President asked me to come over and take his personal belongings away. Chi-Chi, I might need you to confirm it." Pei Chi-Chi felt a little sour in her heart. She naturally knew what he meant by this. This was no longer his home. She didn't know what he would do to her if he was handling his belongings like this. "Okay." She heard her own voice. She walked slowly into the changing room and opened his locker blankly. "These are Mr. Tang's clothes. And here," she opened a small drawer. "These are his accessories." Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and opened another secret compartment. This is a gift from him. Take it with you. She thought for a moment and said, I will make a list. Please bring it to him. Xiaoran said hesitantly, the CEO only said to move his personal belongings. He didn't say to take them with you. Moreover, Tang Yu wouldn't do that. Pei Chi didn't say anything. She just went barefooted and pulled 2 big boxes over. After counting and sealing the boxes, the list was in Xiaoran's hands. Xiaoran looked at Pei Chi and sighed in her heart. She had always thought that Pei Chi and the president would end up together. She had never seen a couple as close as the president and Chi. Listen to me. If you still have feelings for the president, it's not too late. In the end, Xiaoran still couldn't bear to see her like this. Pei Chi didn't know what was good for her. She was very grateful for Xiaoran's intention, but she couldn't do anything about it. She couldn't even convince herself, let alone others. She didn't say anything. Xiaoran knew that there was no turning back. It wasn't appropriate for her to ask too much about the president's private affairs, so she didn't say anything more and left. An hour later, a black limousine slowly drove into a luxurious villa. The entire villa was in the style of a European palace. It covered a vast area and looked ridiculously large. Chapter 293. It was a spring day in the courtyard, and the sun shone on a lovely fountain. The Holy Virgin Mary was holding a baby, and the water splashes were colorful and dazzling under the sun. The limousine stopped, and Xiaoran got out. The 2 maids carried the suitcase to the main house. The sound of a piano poured out in the big hall, smooth and beautiful. Xiaoran stepped on the smooth floor, hesitated for a moment, and said to the man who was playing the piano in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, No, it's done. Tang Yu wore a pair of white casual pants with a light gray sweater on top. His nobility did not diminish at all. Hearing Xiaoran's words, his slender fingers didn't stop, and he just asked faintly, Did she say anything? Xiaoran gestured for the 2 maids to put down the things, and then said, Miss Pei brought over the things that I gave her. The music stopped abruptly. Tang Yu put his fingers on the piano cover, and after a pause, he turned his head to look at Xiaoran. Xiaoran's heart skipped a beat. Then, did she return a piece of jade to me? Tang Yu's voice was very soft, and there were no fluctuations in his emotions. Xiaoran pursed her lips, and she thought for a moment. I don't think so. She thought that Tang Yu would ask again, but he didn't say anything else. He just raised his hand and gestured for the 2 maids to put the things upstairs. Xiaoran didn't know whether to advance or retreat, and she still stood there. In fact, she didn't get involved in CEO's private affairs, and CEO didn't let her get involved. She guessed boldly, that CEO asked her to go to Xia City today because she was familiar with Chi. There was still a trace of affection in CEO's heart, or maybe there was room for it. It all depended on what Chi would do. Tang Yu stood up from the piano chair and slowly walked to the sofa to sit down. His whole body was bathed in the sunlight, looking noble and elegant. But Xiaoran felt that he looked very gloomy. This is the house where I plan to marry Chi. After we get engaged, we'll still live in Xia City. We'll come here on the weekends. Tang Yu hung his head. I'm probably living alone now. Xiaoran didn't dare to say a word. Actually, when she walked here, she had a vague feeling that this place was prepared for Pei Chi. All the decorations here were things that little girls would like. French windows, piano, sunny tea room. It was really comfortable to the extreme. You go back to the company first. Tang Yu's voice was light. I will go to work tomorrow morning. Xiaoran was relieved, but not so much. The CEO seemed to be fine, but in fact, he had something on his mind. He was just suppressing it, but too much pride prevented him from telling anyone. After Xiaoran left, Tang Yu opened the lid of the piano and continued playing. It was a song, to Alice. He had practiced for a long time to give it to her on the engagement night. Chapter 294. Tang Yu's lips curled into a sneer. He didn't even want to keep this. He raised his head and smiled self-deprecatingly. Then, he closed the drawer. At this moment, his phone rang. Tang Yu picked it up. It was old Master Lin Jinan. Grandfather? Tang Yu greeted him calmly. In fact, he knew very well what old Master Lin was thinking. Lin Jinan's voice was full of energy. Tang Yu, have you found that girl? Tang Yu walked to the window and stood there. His voice became even calmer. I found her. What's wrong? Lin Jinan coughed lightly. Actually, I thought about it later. That girl is not bad. She's good-looking and obedient. She looks like an IKEA girl. Tang Yu smiled very lightly. Really? You chose her? Now that I've praised her, don't you feel anything at all? Old Master Lin suddenly sighed. Tang Yu, you've been smart since you were young. How can you not know what grandfather is thinking? Jinrong is like that, and I'm already so old. How many more years do I have to live? Tang Yu's face turned cold. I just want to hold my grandson as soon as possible to fulfill my wish. Old Master Lin's voice was especially lonely. That girl is pregnant and throwing a tantrum. Just give in a little. This engagement can be rescheduled. Tang Yu felt a little uncomfortable because he knew Lin Jinan's character very well. When the younger generation made a mistake, he would usually not tolerate it. Especially the matter between Jinrong and Pei Huan. He had been beaten 20 times. But now, because of a non-existent child, grandfather was actually willing to give in to him. Grandfather, there's no child. Chi-Chi is not pregnant. Tang Yu told the truth. Lin Jinan was stunned. Tang Yu thought that he would get angry, but he didn't. Lin Jinan only gave a disappointed, oh, and then said lightly, then there will be in the future. Tang Yu, if that girl still wants to be with you, don't bully her. It's not easy for her. You can't blame her for Jinrong's matter. With that, he hung up the phone. Tang Yu looked at his phone and pondered for a while. Sheng Yuan's CEO office. Tang Yu sat upright and flipped through the documents in his hands. From Meng Qingqing's point of view, there was a sense of abstinence. But thinking about it, Tang Yu hadn't seen Pei Chi-Chi for about half a month, as if she didn't exist in his life. If this wasn't abstinence, what was it? Meng Qingqing coughed softly, but he still plucked up the courage to ask, how are you going to deal with that person in Xia City? Tang Yu did not look up. What do you mean by how? Pei Xiaoqi. Meng Qingqing screamed. Have you forgotten about me? I heard that boss Pei of the Pei Corporation hasn't been having a good time recently. No one knew which gust of wind blew past, but the news of Tang Yu and Pei Chi-Chi's marriage cancellation had gotten out. One could imagine how much of an impact it had on the Pei Corporation, which was on the verge of collapse. Many people wanted nothing more than to trample on them. Tang Yu pursed his lips and finally looked up at Meng Qingqing. There's nothing to do. Just do as before. Do as before? Which before? Meng Qingqing pondered for a long time before he remembered that it was before he first met that person. In other words, he would treat Pei Chi-Chi as his mistress and let her live in Xia City. Then, when Tang Yu had time, he would go over to vent. Tang Yu. Meng Qingqing became serious. If you say that you don't want to continue with her, then forget it. Let the young lady go. Tang Yu heard this and laughed inaudibly. Chapter 296. By the time Tang Yu arrived at Xia City, it was already 10 o'clock at night. The driver opened the car door for him and hesitated for a moment. Sir, do you need me to wait for you here? Tang Yu replied without thinking. About 2 hours. Let's wait here. Then he walked towards the elevator, covered in black in the dark. The driver looked at his back and felt suspicious. 2 hours. Isn't it just time for a room? Tang Yu stood in the elevator and looked at himself in the mirror. He told himself that he just wanted to see how miserable she was. The elevator opened, and he opened the door. The room was dimly lit, and there was the sound of water coming from the bedroom. He put down the key, took off his black coat slowly and threw it on the sofa. Then, he took off his watch. He walked to the bathroom lightly. As expected, Pei Chi-Chi was taking a shower. She had just come back and was very tired. She would feel better after taking a hot shower. When Tang Yu opened the door, She was shocked and instinctively covered her body with a bath towel. Her eyes were fixed on him, and there was a mixture of emotions in them. "Don't you welcome me?" Tang Yu leaned against the door and said coldly. Pei Chi pursed her lips, held the bath towel in her hand, and shook her head desperately. "So you want me to come?" He stepped forward and came to her side. He looked down at her from above. He was tall and well-dressed, which made her look as weak as a young beast. Tang Yu pinched her chin with his slender fingers and forced her to look up at him. "What do you want me to do? To possess you?" He pulled her to him with one hand and held her firmly. Pei Chi was a little embarrassed. The way he treated her was just like how he would treat a prostitute, but she couldn't refute it because she asked for it. From the moment she decided to leave him, she was destined to bear all of this and the way he treated her. He looked at her and the jade on her neck. His eyes were unpredictable and eager. This woman was still his woman. No matter who was in her heart, she was still Tang Yu's woman. She was a woman that he could possess and take whenever he wanted. This was something that Jin Rong could not do. He must have had a little too much to drink. Taking advantage of his drunken state, he mercilessly raped her in the bathroom. In a humiliating way, without gentleness or emotion, he wanted her mechanically. When it was over, he left her. Pei Chi-Chi's body slowly slid down the wall and fell to the ground. His hair was wet and tangled, blocking half of his face. She watched as Tang Yu took off his clothes and stood under the shower to wash himself. During the whole process, he didn't say a single word to her. After he was done, he walked out in a bathrobe and said to her, "Wash yourself clean." As the door closed, Pei Chi-Chi slowly moved her body and walked over to wash herself. She raised her head and the warm water flowed down and covered her eyes. As it dripped down, it was warm everywhere. She walked out of the bathroom to the bedroom and dried her hair slowly with the hairdryer. This was because Tang Yu didn't like to sleep with his hair wet. At this time, the lights in the bedroom were dim. Just like before, there was a lamp at the bedside. Chapter 297. Pei Chi-Chi was sitting in her white pajamas, which made her face look even paler. Tang Yu leaned against the headboard and smoked. He was looking at something on his phone, but he didn't look at her. In the rumbling sound of the hairdryer, she heard him ask lightly, "How have you been?" Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. She looked at herself in the mirror. She was so pale. How could she be doing well? Turning off the hairdryer, she turned her body slightly to look at Tang Yu. It was only under such circumstances that she dared to look at him like this. She didn't want him to suspect that there were too many feelings in her eyes. Towards Tang Yu, there was love, dependence, admiration, and even worship. He had a completely different life from her. Pei Chi-Chi didn't want to destroy his life. She thought that even if he doted on her now, maybe because he loved her, there were so many beautiful girls in this world, but he only had one mother. Zhaoku had hurt them so deeply that she didn't have the face to marry him. One day, he would meet a girl who wasn't as complicated and awkward as she was. She moved her lips and said in a hoarse voice, "I'm okay." Tang Yu put down his phone and leaned against the headboard. His gaze was deep. "But I heard that you're not that good. That's why you came to see me, right?" she asked softly, holding the comb tightly in her hand. Being with him now, every step was dangerous. She was afraid that he would see through her disguise, so she didn't dare to reveal anything. She hoped that he would hate her and drive her away, but she was afraid that he would hate her. That kind of gaze made her afraid, made her feel ashamed. Tang Yu didn't comment. After a while, he said lightly, "Don't you have anything to say to me?" With that said, his gaze fell on her little face. The familiar acceleration of her heartbeat started again. Pei Chi-Chi's heart was thumping, and her breathing was unstable. She even suspected that her face was hot. In the past, she only thought that Tang Yu was passionate about sex. Now, she knew that she could do it too. She would also have a desire for Tang Yu, and she would also want him. Especially now, there was a feeling that every time he did it, there would be one less time. She walked over to him softly and climbed onto the bed. Then she leaned into his arms and kissed him from head to toe. When she kissed his clean and beautiful chin, He reached out to grab her little hand and threw her aside. I don't want it now. Pei Chi was stunned for a moment and then felt a little embarrassed. She sat on the side, pulled up her pajamas, and carefully covered her body with the quilt. Meanwhile, Tang Yu had been staring at her. Under that kind of gaze, she was extremely embarrassed and resentful. A young girl, was rejected for the first time, and it was at a time when their relationship was so bad. I thought that since you have Jinrong in your heart, you would want to keep yourself chaste. He smiled faintly and pinched her chin. Pei Chi, you can only take off your clothes when I want you. Do you understand? She nodded embarrassedly. Also, don't kiss me in the future. Don't touch me, because I don't need it, he said coldly. She quickly remembered that he didn't kiss her in the bathroom previously. There was only pure venting, and not a single kiss. Although it wasn't barbaric, there was no warmth in the process. He really thought that she was sold. Chapter 298. Pei Chi looked at him with tears in her eyes. Do you want to cry? He moved closer to her, so close that he could see his reflection in her eyes. I thought your tears had dried up in Jinrong's ward. She closed her eyes. Can we not talk about him? Are you upset? Tang Yu sneered. He leaned back and put out the cigarette in his hand. Pei Chi lowered her head and said softly, Tang Yu, can you let me go? He was about to put on his clothes and leave, but he stopped. His movement slowed down, and he fell back again. He was still leaning there, and his gaze fell on the opposite wall. After a long while, he chuckled. Let you go? Pei Chi, have you forgotten that I paid 300 million yuan for you? Of course she knew, but she couldn't stay with him like this anymore. She would go crazy. She longed for him, crazily, but she wanted him to hate her. She would go crazy. I can pay you back. With what? He smiled coldly. Pei Chi, don't tell me. With your body. He reached out and pinched her chin, forcing her to look up at him. His eyes searched her eyes, as if he was looking for something. After a long while, he suddenly let go of her. Pei Chi, don't even think about it. Before I get tired of you, if I find out that you're having an affair with another man, I'll let you know the consequences of angering me. His voice was cold. In fact, she already knew it now. She was already having a hard time after angering him. The Pei group was besieged on all sides overnight. She had tried her best, but to no avail. She began to wonder if she could do nothing without Tang Yu. He hated her, so she might as well make him hate her even more. Pei Chi crawled towards him again. She ignored his orders and the rules he had set. She pressed her hand on his knee and quickly kissed his Adam's apple, pleasing him in the way he liked. Tang Yu grabbed her little head and did not let her kiss him. His voice was hoarse and low. Pei Chi. There was a warning in his voice. She looked up and bit his palm. Tang Yu, were you satisfied just now? Her voice was as lazy as that of a kitten, and it went straight to his heart. Tang Yu stared into her eyes. Do you have something to ask of me, or what? He always had a glimmer of hope for her. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked this. How could Pei Chi not know? She put her hand around his neck and whispered in his ear, Please? He narrowed his eyes. Although he had already expected what she would say, he still felt endless disappointment and even despair at this moment. He reached out and pushed her away. His action was a little rough. She thought that he would leave, but Tang Yu lifted the quilt and looked at her with a mocking gaze. Didn't you want to beg me? Let's see what you can do. Pei Chi knew what he meant. He had forced himself on her once, and she had done it willingly once. But now, what was this? This was a deal. Even if she did not see their relationship as a deal, but he must have thought so. She lay down, lifted her hair, and moved her mouth closer to his. Suddenly, he pulled her hair and said in a hoarse voice, Wait a minute. Chapter 299. The chain broke, leaving a thin line of blood on her delicate skin. The jade that symbolized the young madam of the Tang family was already in his hand. Pei Chi was still in a daze. She looked at the jade in his hand and forgot about the pain. "You don't deserve to wear this when you do such a despicable thing," he said coldly. He put the jade on the bedside table and looked at her. "You can wear it now." But her whole body was cold. She didn't move an inch. Tang Yu sneered and ignored her. He went straight to the changing room and put on the clothes he had changed out of. He took the jade with him when he left. Just like what he said, she didn't deserve it. He came suddenly and left quickly. He left Pei Chi sitting on the bed. She touched her neck with her fingers. Her hand was stained with blood. She touched the wound, but she didn't feel any pain. She touched it anxiously, looking for it. It was gone. There was nothing there. Tang Yu sat in the car but didn't leave immediately. He closed his eyes. His hand was still touching the jade. It was still warm. There was still her warmth and a trace of blood on it. He didn't say anything. The driver didn't dare to drive. After a long time, Tang Yu said in a low voice, "Go to the rose garden." The driver nodded. He drove the car smoothly and steadily. He was afraid that Mr. Tang would feel any discomfort. Mr. Tang wasn't in a bad mood when he went up. Why was he in a bad mood when he came down? Tang Yu sat in the back seat. His fingers kept touching the jade in his hand. After a long time, he suddenly picked up his phone and called Ming Qingqing. "Qingqing, help me make arrangements. Regarding the pay group, do what they did in the past and in the future. Replace Ning Hao for me. Replace him with someone who is more sensible." He was angry with Pei Chi, but Pei Chi was still his woman. He was the only one who could bully his woman. How could it be someone else's turn? On the other side, Meng Qingqing heard it and immediately gave the order. "I knew it. You'll get back together after drinking some chicken soup. How is it? Are you staying in Xia City tonight?" "No." Tang Yu didn't say much to him and hung up the phone directly. On the other side, Meng Qingqing was very surprised. If they hadn't reconciled, why did they have to be so nice to Pei Chi? Wasn't it said that only when people were forced into a corner would they turn around and beg for forgiveness, crying and begging? Meng Qingqing did not seem to have loved a woman like Tang Yu. He must not have known that loving someone and wanting to receive that person's love, self-esteem, and pride would not allow him to do that. However, Meng Qingqing and Tang Yu didn't expect that Tang Yu would do that. It was not because he wanted to force her, but because he loved her deeply. The two of them loved each other deeply, so no matter what they did, it would never be too much. After the call, Tang Yu was not in a good mood. Holding the jade in his hand, he recalled what Old Master Lin had said to him when he visited him these past few days. Old Master Lin meant that he was getting old. He should either tolerate Pei Chi or find a quiet and beautiful woman to carry on the family line. Carry on the family line? After experiencing such a wonderful feeling, how could he be willing to let his marriage be just to carry on the family line? Tang Yu clenched the thing in his hand and closed his eyes. Chapter 300. The moment Pei Chi arrived at the office the next day, Little One ran over excitedly. "Boss Pei, the company is finally saved." Pei Chi looked at her. "What's wrong?" Little One was so excited that she did not know what to do. She said repeatedly, "It's Jia Mei. Jia Mei, weren't our sales channels maliciously cut off previously? Now it's back to normal." Pei Chi was stunned. She recalled what Tang Yu had asked her last night. Obviously, he had gone to Xia City because he knew about it. Little One looked at her in a daze and reached out to hold her arm. "Boss Pei, the other orders and collaborating companies have all called. They have all been restored." "That's great. We fought a beautiful turnaround." Little Win's morale was high as she waved her fist. Pei Chi pursed her lips and walked towards her office. After sitting down, she pondered deeply. "Little One, we did not do anything," she had to reflect. After leaving Tang Yu, she could not do anything if no one gave him face. To put it bluntly, in the business world, she was just a child who had not fully grown hair yet. Little Win's face fell. "Boss Pei, why are you belittling your own prestige?" Pei Chi smiled faintly. "No, I just feel that we cannot rely on others' charity to survive." Of course, but it's not charity. It's... Little one tried hard to beautify it, but could not think of anything after thinking for a long time. Pei Chi did not say anything. She only flipped open the documents on the table. She had to open up new clients or old clients of the Pei Corporation. She had to win back their trust. She did not want to leave Tangyu one day. She lived such a lowly and pitiful life. In her heart, there was still a tiny bit of hope. The girl that Tangyu loved must be strong, beautiful, and worthy of him, even if she could not stand by his side and accompany him for the rest of his life. However, she hoped that when she saw him, she didn't need to look up or sneak around. Pei Chi also admitted that such a thought was ridiculous. To leave him and still have such thoughts. To leave him and still want to see him. Yes, she was so disappointing. She missed him like this. Pei Chi became busier. Often, it was already 1 o'clock at night when she returned to Xia City. She took a taxi alone and often fell asleep in the car. When she woke up, she was already in Xia City. Later, she learned driving on her own, and it took her 2 months. She bought a white shime. Her hands and feet were cold the first time she went on the road. She was trembling, not knowing what to do, but she still drove steadily. At that time, she was as happy as a child learning how to walk. She really wanted to tell Tangyu that she could drive now, but she could not see him because she had not seen him for nearly 3 months. She could not help but murmured. Chi was so that she could not see her eyes. She was, Xiao Chi did not see him. Pei Chi's eyes would heat up just by looking at it.